The winter of 1241–1242 fell hard over the Hungarian plains. Mongol riders, the same men who had left the steppes of Mongolia years before, were now standing on the edge of the Adriatic Sea. They looked out at that cold, endless water, an ocean none of them had ever seen. Behind them, cities in ashes. Ahead, only the unknown. For a moment, the whole world seemed within reach. And then they turned. They mounted their horses, pointed east, and simply rode away. That's the question that's haunted historians for centuries. Why? Why did the most devastating army Europe had ever faced, an army that had destroyed two great European armies in 2 days, killed more than 100,000 people in weeks, sacked Kiev, Krakow, and dozens of towns from the Urals to the Adriatic? Why'd that army just stop, turn its back and leave? The obvious answers don't work. They weren't defeated. No European army managed to beat the Mongols in open battle. The heaviest cavalry of Christendom shredded like dry kindling. The Knights Templar, the Teutonic Knights, the Polish nobility, the Royal Army of Hungary all destroyed in days. Nothing left between the Mongols and the Atlantic. So why did they stop? To understand what happened that winter, you need to put yourself in the shoes of a fleeing king. Bela IV, King of Hungary, had lost virtually everything in 2 days of battle that April. He had watched his 60,000-strong army be encircled, trapped, and annihilated along the Sajo River. He had escaped on horseback with the Mongols a few miles behind him, and spent the following months fleeing from island to island along the Adriatic coast. A king without a kingdom, sending desperate letters to the Pope, to the Emperor, to any Christian sovereign who could help. None of them came. And on the other side of the equation, the Mongol army that had reached the Adriatic and looked out at the water. The king was still alive on his islands. The stone fortresses would not yield. Winter was getting harsher. And then, in those final weeks of 1241, something happened. First in the sky, later in Karakorum, the capital of the Mongol world, on the other side of the planet. The answer history books usually give is too simple. And the answer I'm going to show you today involves something that happened in the sky on a December night in 1241. Something the most fearsome army in the world saw and could not ignore. This is the story of the blood moon of 1241. And I promise you, it's not the story you think you know, because the weapon that stopped the most powerful army in history was not European. But before we get to the moon, we need to understand what was looking at it. Batu Khan's army was not just an army, it was the product of decades of systematic military evolution, perfected by a genius named Subutai, a man who probably planned more victorious battles than any other general in human history. While European commanders thought in terms of single battles, Subutai thought in terms of entire campaigns. While Europeans measured distances in day-long marches, Subutai calculated movements of hundreds of kilometers with a precision that would make any modern staff officer lean forward in his chair with respect. That's what makes the difference. The network of spies and merchants Subutai sent out years before. They mapped everything. The Mongol war machine was unlike anything the world had seen. It didn't rely on Roman-style supply lines. It didn't need paved roads, no central hub to destroy, no weak point. It was fluid disappearing in one place, reappearing hundreds of miles away like water finding cracks in a dam. Every Mongol warrior carried everything he needed. Spare horses, usually 3 or 4 each. Dried meat, fermented milk. A Mongol army could cover about 50 miles a day while European armies managed 15 to 19 at best. In medieval warfare, speed was not just a tactical advantage. It was a strategic weapon that transformed the whole logic of conflict. An enemy who arrived before you could prepare was an enemy who had already won before the first blow. But cavalry and speed were only the beginning. What made the Mongols truly terrifying was their combination of mobility with systematic intelligence. Before any invasion, Subutai sent networks of spies and merchants, years before the first rider crossed the border. They mapped roads, identified political divisions between neighboring realms, catalogued where food was stored, where defenses were weak, which nobles hated their neighbors enough to possibly collaborate. When the army finally advanced, it was not entering the unknown. It was executing a plan carried out with terrifying precision. Then, there was the psychological warfare, and they'd perfected it like no one else. They deliberately cultivated a reputation for absolute brutality. But here's the key: it was calculated, not random. Cities that surrendered got spared and integrated into the Mongol system efficiently. Cities that resisted? Utterly destroyed, survivors released to spread the word. Pure psychological warfare. So effective that fortresses opened their gates without a single arrow, because the Mongols' reputation had already arrived. To understand what Europe faced in 1241, you need to understand what they had done before. Between 1237 and 1240, Batu and Subutai systematically destroyed the Russian principalities. It was not a series of opportunistic raids. It was the methodical elimination of a civilization. Ryazan fell in December 1237. Vladimir fell in February 1238. Moscow, Tver, Suzdal, one after another. And in 1240, Kiev, the largest and richest Slavic city of the time, one of the great medieval cities of the world, known as the mother of all Russian cities, was swept from the face of the earth. Medieval accounts describe a scene of total desolation. Skulls piled outside the walls, churches turned into stables, fields that would not be cultivated for a generation. A chronicler who visited Kiev a few years later described seeing thousands of skulls and bones scattered across the fields around the destroyed city. Kiev would not be a major city again for centuries. That was the dress rehearsal. Europe paid no attention. At the start of 1241, the Mongol army was ready for the main act. And Subutai's strategic masterpiece was the way he split his forces into two pincers, separated by hundreds of kilometers, coordinating them with a precision that would be admirable even with modern communication. And that was practically supernatural given the technology of the time. The northern pincer, commanded by General Kaidu with secondary forces, advanced through Poland. The southern pincer, under Batu's direct command with Subutai as the strategic architect, advanced through Hungary. The idea was simple in theory and extraordinarily difficult in execution. Prevent the Polish and Hungarian forces from joining, destroy each separately on ground of the Mongols' choosing, and then converge to continue the drive toward the heart of Western Europe. What happened next? Europe's worst medieval catastrophe. April 9th, 1241. Legnica, in Poland. Duke Henry II of Silesia had assembled one of the largest military forces Central Europe had seen in generations. Polish knights, Teutonic knights, Knights Templar drawn from across Christendom to defend the faith, Moravian and German troops. It was an army of roughly 25,000 men, a force any European sovereign would have considered formidable, more than enough to face any invader. The Mongols? About 20,000 horsemen. Henry wasn't worried. He should have been. The Battle of Legnica lasted hours. The Mongols used their favorite tactic with perfect precision because they'd practiced it: feigned retreat. Polish and Templar cavalry got drawn into pursuit, scattered across the field, split apart. Once the European army was spread out, separated, vulnerable, the mounted archers turned and unleashed. Arrows from everywhere at once. European knights' heavy armor, perfect in close combat, fatal in this. Too slow to escape, couldn't stop arrows coming at horses and visors from every direction. Henry's army was destroyed. The Duke died on the field. His head impaled on a spear, carried around the walls of Legnica as a warning. The surviving Templar knights sent letters describing the defeat so complete that their superiors didn't believe it at first. 2 days later, 500 kilometers to the south, the same thing happened on a much larger scale. April 11th, 1241. The Sejo River, in Hungary. King Bela IV of Hungary had mobilized the Royal Hungarian Army, about 60,000 men, including the kingdom's nobility, heavy cavalry, archers, and support troops. It was the largest force Hungary had raised in generations. The Mongols had roughly 30,000 horsemen. On paper, the Hungarians had twice the numbers. Bela was confident. He had crossed the Sejo River and camped in a position that looked defensible, with the river protecting one flank. Subutai planned differently. On the night of April 10-11, while the Hungarian army slept in camp, Subutai silently split the Mongol army into two groups. The first group, commanded by Batu, attacked the main bridge over the Sejo at dawn, a noisy, visible assault that immediately captured the Hungarians' full attention and made Bela concentrate his forces to defend the crossing. The second group, under Subutai's personal command, crossed the river several kilometers downstream at a place the Hungarians had not guarded, undetected, and advanced silently through the darkness to emerge in the rear of the Hungarian camp at dawn. Bela woke to every medieval commander's worst nightmare, completely surrounded. This wasn't a battle, it was a massacre. The Mongols bombarded the camp with catapults, incendiary projectiles, dark choking smoke. Hungarians tried to break out. Mongol cavalry was waiting. Tried holding position, constant bombardment. About 40,000 died that day at the Sajo. Bela fled on horseback through the chaos, and the Mongols hunted him for weeks, a king riding through his own destroyed kingdom, passing burning towns. 2 days, 2 armies, 90,000 soldiers destroyed. All while the rest of Europe barely knew what was happening, and now the path was open. There was no organized army left between the Mongols and the Atlantic Ocean. None. The Mongols pushed west, crossed the Great Hungarian Plain, reached the Dalmatian coast of the Adriatic, covering hundreds of miles in weeks. Bela therefore kept fleeing, from Pest to the Adriatic, from port to port, from island to island, while the army that had destroyed his realm swept the interior. Ask any observer in December 1241 what had happened next, and the answer's obvious. Western Europe would fall. Austria, northern Italy, Bavaria, France. All exposed, no coordinated defense, no leader to unite them. The Holy Roman Empire was fighting the papacy. France was absorbed in its own politics. England barely knew what was happening. Europe wasn't expecting the Mongols, nor was it preparing. And then something began to change. Not on the battlefield, not in any European palace, in something Subutai's maps had failed to foresee. But the Mongol army was not invincible. It never had been. What looked like invincibility was, in fact, a careful combination of speed, intelligence, and exploiting specific enemy weaknesses. And in the winter of 1241-1242, for the first time in the Western campaign, the Mongols began encountering obstacles their tactics couldn't solve with their usual ease. The first problem was stone. Mongol cavalry was devastating in open fields, unmatched in speed and maneuver. But stone fortresses? Completely different. They had siege engineers specialists from China and Persia, but prolonged sieges drained everything. Months of staying put. Exactly what killed their greatest advantage: speed. Esztergom held. Stone walls withstood the attacks. Defenders had supplies, didn't need to fight on Mongol terrain. Mongols attacked, couldn't force surrender fast enough, moved on. Same story up the Dalmatian coast. Spalato today's Split held. Trogir held. Defenders stayed behind stone and waited, and King Bela IV was still alive. This mattered more than you'd think. A survived king wasn't just a fugitive, he was continuity. A legal point where Hungary still existed. And the Mongols? No ships. Their power was land-based. Crossing water to reach Bela on islands? Impossible for them. The second problem was food. The Mongol army lived off the land-captured livestock, grain from granaries, forage. The Great Hungarian Plain was rich before. By winter, 1241-1242, plundered and burned. Livestock slaughtered or fled. Granaries empty. Villages ashes. And the winter was brutal. Supply lines stretched 1,860 miles, 3,000 kilometers, back to the steppes, through territory the army itself had destroyed. An army needs to eat. War horses require enormous amounts of forage each week. The farther west the army ventured, the more tenuous that lifeline became, and the harder it was to find food in the lands ahead. Lands that hadn't been looted simply because they hadn't yet been reached. None of these factors would have stopped the Mongols on their own. They had overcome impossible logistics before. They had taken fortresses that seemed impenetrable. They had hunted kings in flight across absurd distances. The Mongol war machine was designed to overcome obstacles, and the obstacles it met in Hungary were real, but not insurmountable. But there was something else going on. The secret lay in the beliefs of the most fearsome army in the world, in something so deep and invisible that no European general could ever have planned for, and so simple that the Mongols themselves never saw it coming. The secret was in the sky. A blood moon. I know. You came for battles, strategy, the deadliest medieval army. But here's the thing. No spear, no castle, no European king did what an astronomical event did. And the reason? It's inside the Mongols themselves. To understand what a blood moon meant to a Mongol warrior in 1241, you need to understand how they viewed the universe. The Mongols practiced Tengrism, shamanic worship of Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Not just another god. The supreme force governing everything. The sky wasn't metaphorical, it was the literal presence of the highest divinity. Victory meant Tengri approved. Defeat? Not bad luck or incompetence. It meant Tengri'd withdrawn his favor. And the Mongols believed, with all the seriousness and depth a belief can hold, that Tengri communicated with men through the heavens. A comet meant something. A planetary alignment meant something. Thunder out of season meant something. A solar eclipse meant shaman consultations. A total lunar eclipse, when the full moon was swallowed by shadow and emerged transformed. Red as blood was the most powerful, terrifying message the sky could send. This wasn't casual superstition, not the belief of an ignorant villager. It was sophisticated theology, lived systematically. It was the core of how the Mongol warrior elite, their generals, their khans, their princes, interpreted what was happening around them, and what they should do about it. Genghis Khan himself canceled campaigns because of celestial omens. He'd consulted shamans before major decisions. He interpreted natural events, volcanic eruptions darkening the sky, droughts devastating the steppes, eclipses as divine messages. Ignoring them wasn't recklessness. It was defying Tengri. That belief permeated every level of Mongol society. It wasn't only the Khans who believed it. It was every commander, every warrior, every officer who kept the army's logistics running. The spiritual world and the physical world were not separate to them. They were one world, and the heavens were the medium by which the spiritual layer communicated with the physical layer directly and unmistakably. And then, at some point in December 1241, on a night modern astronomical calculations allow us to identify with reasonable precision, something happened in the sky over the Hungarian plains and the Adriatic region. The full moon, the one lighting the snow on the plains where Mongol armies camped, casting shadows over tents and horses and fires, began to darken. Slowly, Earth's shadow crept across it. Within an hour, it became something neither normal nor absent. Red. Red-orange, deep and strange, pulsing in the black December sky like an open eye in darkness, an eye looking back, a blood moon. But for a Mongol warrior on frozen Hungarian plains, 3,000 miles from home, after years campaigning, with stretched supply lines and stone castles that wouldn't break, and a fleeing king they couldn't catch, that warrior wasn't seeing physics. He was seeing a message. Tengri was speaking. The phenomenon is called a total lunar eclipse, and we know exactly why it happens. Sunlight, passing through Earth's atmosphere, is filtered and refracted by the atmospheric gases, and only the longest wavelengths, the red, bend at the angle necessary to reach the lunar surface. It's physics. It's astronomy. It's completely explainable without any reference to the supernatural. But for the men who looked at that moon that night, the scientific explanation simply didn't exist. What existed was what the eyes saw and what faith interpreted, and Mongol faith interpreted it in only one way. And what Tengri said, within the whole framework of Tengrism, within the whole tradition of reading omens that had guided Genghis Khan's family for generations, was not encouraging. A blood moon at the westernmost point of the greatest campaign the Mongol people had ever launched was, at best, a severe warning. At worst, it was condemnation. The shamans in the Mongol camp would have been consulted immediately, and the shamans knew what the people and commanders wanted to hear. But they were also professionals who had read omens their entire adult lives, and they knew what the heavens seemed to be saying that night. It couldn't be ignored easily. To ignore a celestial omen of that magnitude wasn't just to risk military defeat on the battlefield, it was to risk the soul itself, the divine approval of Tengri, the sacred legitimacy that had given the Mongol people the right to conquer the world. To challenge Tengri outright was not bravery, it was blasphemy. And the most powerful army in the world discovered there was one thing it could not fight: its own gods. The eclipse shook the army, but it didn't stop it by itself. Because history was about to add another piece to the puzzle, and that piece, unlike the eclipse, was absolutely undeniable and legally binding. In December 11th, 1241, at Karakorum, the capital of the Mongol Empire on the other side of the world, the great Khan Ögedei died. Ögedei was Genghis Khan's third son and chosen successor. He'd approved and ordered the Western campaign. Batu and Subutai answered to him. Every city taken, every European army destroyed, it was all in his name. And now he was dead. For most medieval armies, a ruler's death mid-campaign could be hidden or managed. For the Mongols? No. The great Khan's death triggered an obligation like nothing else in medieval politics. A Kurultai. The Kurultai was the great assembly of the Mongol people, the supreme council where leaders met, deliberated, decided the future. When the great Khan died with no formal successor, a Kurultai wasn't optional. It was a sacred duty written into the empire's foundations, and the Kurultai required every high-ranking Mongol leader in person. No exceptions, no delegations, no proxies. The princes of Genghis's line, the generals, the Noyans, all had to travel to Karakorum personally. Otherwise, the assembly wasn't legitimate. This included Batu Khan. Batu was the supreme commander and the most powerful prince of Genghis's line. He also had ambitions and rivals waiting at Karakorum. With Ögedei dead, the succession was wide open. Stay on the Hungarian plains while rivals maneuvered in Karakorum? That'd be political suicide. Return to find the throne taken and your power slashed? That was the real risk. The Mongol postal system, the YAM, relay stations across the empire, was extraordinarily efficient. Professional riders covered hundreds of kilometers a day when ordinary riders had managed tens. Ögedei's death reached the Hungarian plains in weeks. Probably the fastest long-distance message delivery in human history up to that point. When the message reached Batu's camp, it was definitive. The empire's own law had already decided. This wasn't a rival's order to ignore. It came from the system that created Batu's power, a system he couldn't fight. And so the withdrawal began. Here's the crucial thing. Ögedei didn't die in a vacuum. He died after the eclipse, a sequence with terrifying logic for Mongol cosmology. The heavens sent a warning through the blood moon. Then, weeks later, the great Khan died. The warning was fulfilled, dramatically and undeniably. To a Mongol warrior raised in Tengrism, to commanders who'd consulted shamans for every major decision, this wasn't coincidence. It was confirmation. The pattern they'd been taught to recognize. Tengri had spoken through the blood moon. The army didn't react urgently enough, stayed in position. So Tengri reinforced the message the clearest way possible. He removed the great Khan himself. Now we have all the pieces. And what they reveal together is something history books rarely admit. The secret was inside the enemy itself. Which piece stopped the Mongols? All of them. Together. In a convergence that anyone alone probably wouldn't have been enough. What was happening to Batu Khan's army in winter 1241-1242? Supply lines were at the limit. The Hungarian plains were stripped bare. Cattle scarce. Winter was harsh. Every kilometer west meant harder logistics, more danger. Real problems any general would recognize. Stone fortresses wouldn't surrender quickly. Esztergom held. The Adriatic Islands were unreachable. They had no navy. Bela Tüfür was alive, free, still the king of Hungary. Nothing was settled while he breathed, and then the eclipse came. Imagine being a senior Mongol commander. You're on the other side of the world. Supplies running out faster than replacement. Fortresses aren't falling fast enough. The king you've chased is on an unreachable island. Then, December night, the sky turns red. The eclipse didn't create problems. It collapsed the psychology holding them together. An army believing in victory, in Tengri's favor. It endures hardship. An army doubting divine approval. Every problem becomes confirmation the path is wrong. An army riding high with easy victories and abundant supplies. It'd have absorbed the omen differently. Shamans might find a favorable read. Momentum might outweigh cosmological fear. But an army already under strain, with problematic logistics and real physical obstacles that would not yield, that army was psychologically primed to take the eclipse exactly as confirmation of what it already felt instinctively. That the campaign had gone too far. That Tengri's favor was being tested. Then Ögedei died. The omen became prophecy fulfilled. The Kurultai gave Batu Khan something the eclipse alone couldn't. a legally incontestable reason to leave. Not retreat from fear. Not admit defeat. Fulfill the sacred duty of a Mongol prince to attend the assembly, a duty everyone recognized as taking precedence over any campaign. The eclipse was the psychological catalyst when the army's beliefs shifted. Ogedei's death was the institutional mechanism, the obligation that forced withdrawal no one could question. Logistics and stone fortresses were the physical obstacles eroding momentum. And Batu's ambition was the personal motivation making Karakorum not just obligatory, but urgently desired. None of these factors alone would have been sufficient. Together, they created a perfect storm that achieved what no European army had managed in the field. It stopped the Mongols, and Europe had no idea what had happened. Spring 1242, Batu Khan withdrew his army. Orderly, disciplined, not a rout. The same force that swept through Europe simply left the same way it came, returning east with the same efficiency it had advanced west. Europe didn't understand what it had just survived. News of Poland and Hungary arrived late, distorted, downplayed. King Louis IX briefly considered a crusade response, but nothing materialized. Pope Innocent IV and Emperor Frederick II were too absorbed in their mutual battle to care about an invader who'd left on its own. Europe's interpretation was convenient and comforting. God had driven the infidels away. Divine providence protected Christendom. The danger passed because it had been punishment for Europe's sins, and once served, the instruments were withdrawn. No new fortresses, no early warning system, no defensive alliance. Western Europe returned to its petty wars, feudal disputes, ecclesiastical politics acting like it had never happened, or treating it as miracle instead of lesson. One man survived at the water's edge, literally on an Adriatic island. He'd seen what a Mongol army could do in days. He understood. Withdrawal didn't mean the danger was over. Bela IV returned to his devastated kingdom and rebuilt. But not restoration's systematic transformation based on what had worked and what hadn't. He built stone castles. Thick walls, strategic hills designed to withstand Mongol-style sieges. Not wooden forts they could burn or scale. He reformed Hungary's defense system top to bottom, distributing fortresses across the kingdom instead of concentrating them in one or two cities. The logic came from Bela's personal experience. Walls and islands saved him. If the Mongols returned, and he assumed they would, the answer was more stone, more walls, more heights. Bela was right. The Mongols came back. 1259–60, significant raids. 1285, substantial invasion, deep penetration. Open villages suffered, same as 1241. But the stone castles held. Mongols reached them, assessed the siege costs, moved on. The pattern from Esztergom repeated fortress after fortress. Hungary learned the lesson Europe missed in 1241, carved it in stone with the urgency of survivors. The contrast is stark. Outside Hungary, denial, complacency, convenient narrative turning accidental survival into divine victory. Inside Hungary, systematic reworking of defense based on honest assessment. Here's the final paradox, the deepest part of this story. The Mongols weren't stopped by European virtue, brave knights, brilliant generals, or superior strategy. They were stopped by their own belief system. An eclipse turned into a divine command as powerful as any Khan's order. The secret weapon belonged to the enemy. Tengri, the eternal blue sky. The Mongols believed commanded all humanity had been invoked against them, not by priests or Christian prayer, not by human strategy, simply by astronomy, by Earth's angle around the sun in December 1241, by how atmosphere filters and refracts light. The moon turned red for reasons having nothing to do with Mongols, Europe, or any deity. Just Earth doing what it always does, what it did before humans existed, what it'd do after all those empires became dust. But to men looking at it that December night on frozen Hungarian plains, amid campaign tension at the world's edge, it said something no European general could say. Enough. Think of the Mongol warrior at the Adriatic's edge in winter, 1241 to 1242. He'd left the steppes, crossed the Caucasus, Russian rivers, Polish forests, seen kings flee, cities surrender without fighting. Galloped across more land than most men of his century could imagine. Now he was staring at the sea. Gray, endless water. The horizon where Europe ended, and there was nothing left to conquer. What was he thinking? The moon from weeks earlier. The moon emerging from shadow, red and strange, a warning no one could ignore. Tengri's message. Then the great Khan was dead. The heavens had spoken. The Khan died. The signal was undeniable. He turned his horse, and as he galloped east across ravaged plains, back to the steppes, to Karakorum where the Empire's future'd be decided without him, if he didn't hurry. Europe was left behind, unaware of what just happened, unaware of survival, unaware the thing that saved it wasn't armies, kings, or miracles. It was a moon, a red moon in a December sky, and a people who believed, with full ancient faith, that the heavens could speak. Next time you watch a full moon rise, think of those warriors on Hungarian plains. Think about what they saw. Think about what they felt. Think about how much the world changed because that night, the sky turned red. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and subscribe. We dive every week into stories like this, where the turning point that changed the world came from where nobody was looking. See you next time.